It all began one evening at our regular dinner table when my oldest son, Brad, announced he had something important to share with me. I'm Mary, 51 years old, and I work part-time. Mentally, I still feel youthful, though my body is showing signs of aging. My 3 sons, who have grown up to compensate for my diminishing energy, are my greatest pride. Brad, the eldest, has decided to tie the knot. While I knew he had a girlfriend, hearing about their engagement was still a pleasant surprise. So, Brett's getting married, huh? I guess that means you're getting old, honey. No beer for you tonight then, my husband joked. Ignoring his jests, I focused on Brad's expression. With our other sons away at college, Brad, now working, was the only one still living at home. His maturity had flourished in his years of employment, and now, with marriage on the horizon, he seemed more steadfast and reliable than ever. After my husband tearfully apologized to me, saying, "I'm sorry you're forever young and beautiful," I allowed him just 1 beer, according to my son. They were already discussing wedding venues and ring options, though the actual date was undecided. Brad wanted to bring his fiancée over to meet us first, which felt like a significant step. Marriage is a big milestone, I mused. I want them to have a wonderful ceremony. Though the stars of the day would be my son and his future wife, I couldn't help but feel a flutter of excitement. Perhaps I'd even treat myself to a new dress, reminiscing on my own bridal days as my husband continued to praise how radiant I looked in white. The weekend arrived, and Brad's fiancée, Alice, greeted us casually. "Hello, I'm Alice," she said, her demeanor reflecting the easy confidence of youth. Alice, a part-time worker at Brad's favorite cafe, had been captivated by him and pursued him until they began dating. As conversations lulled, my husband leaned in. "Ah, yes," and I nodded in agreement. "We have something important to share with you, Alice," my husband continued. "Brad isn't our biological son." Alice's eyes widened in surprise. "He's my nephew," I explained softly. "Brad's parents, my brother and his wife, tragically passed away when he was young. We adopted him and raised him as our own. He's like a son to us," my husband added warmly. "Please take good care of him." As Alice processed this revelation, a brief silence hung in the air before my husband swiftly changed the subject to lighter matters. "Well, let's leave the heavy stuff there. What kind of ceremony are you envisioning?" Alice smiled gratefully at the change in tone. "I'd love to wear a traditional white wedding dress, if possible." Glancing at Brad, who beamed in agreement, I couldn't help but share in their excitement. "That sounds wonderful. It's a once-in-a-lifetime event, so it should be perfect for the bride." At that point, Alice made a peculiar expression. For a moment, I thought she was glaring at me, but perhaps it was my imagination. Before I could dwell on it, her face returned to its usual expression. "And what about you, Brad? What kind of wedding do you want?" my husband asked, trying to involve our son in the wedding discussion. "Well, we don't really need your opinion," Alice immediately interjected. "What?" The 3 of us were taken aback, exchanging surprised looks. Alice seemed puzzled by our reactions, as if she couldn't understand what was wrong with her statement. "But didn't you say yourself, Auntie, that it needs to be perfect for the bride? The groom is just a bonus." "I'll have it my way," Alice asserted confidently, her smile radiant. Brad was left speechless, and I was momentarily stunned by her addressing me as Auntie. But shouldn't Brad's wishes also be considered? "Don't worry, leave everything to me, and it'll be the best wedding ever. Just make sure you work hard and contribute the funds, Brad." Alice continued with unstoppable energy and audacity, leaving us all speechless. What a remarkable girl, I thought, nodding in agreement. A few days later, both families met at a nice restaurant. This time my husband's mother was there too. She hadn't been able to join us last time because she was at an adult daycare center. Despite using a cane, she was quite energetic. "Sorry for the delay. Traffic was a nightmare," she apologized as she arrived. Alice spoke in a casual manner, even with my husband's mother, whom she had only met once before. In the background, I noticed Alice's parents shyly waving before taking their seats. The atmosphere was somewhat awkward, with little conversation as we quietly ate our meals. Just as I was about to initiate some small talk, Alice suddenly spoke up. "Granny, do you have trouble walking?" "That's right, dear. Old age has taken a toll on my legs," my mother-in-law replied. "Well, I absolutely refuse to care for you," Alice declared out of the blue, causing a moment of stunned silence. Someone went, "Huh?" It was probably my mother-in-law, but it might have been me, I said, wanting to clarify. I have no intention of caring for any of you. Auntie, you're not my mother, so you're a stranger. And while Uncle might be related, he's not my father. I won't look after any of you, Alice asserted boldly. Hey Alice, Brad attempted to intervene, but she wouldn't relent. And I definitely won't be calling you Dad or Mom, so remember that, Alice added firmly. Glancing at Alice's parents, I was surprised to see them nodding in agreement. Well, it's true that Brad isn't our biological son, but we've raised him as one. My husband tried to interject. Hush, Uncle, Alice cut him off sharply. Okay, I'm sorry, my husband fell silent after the rebuke. At that moment, the gentle sound of a fork being placed down resonated. Is that so? Came a calm but firm statement. I glanced at my mother-in-law. She appeared composed, yet her underlying fury was palpable. They may not be their biological parents, but they've raised them with more love than many real parents would. That's not something outsiders should meddle with, my mother-in-law spoke with authority. I don't care what you say, I'm not doing any caregiving, Alice retorted defiantly. Her words infuriated me, but I held my tongue as my mother-in-law continued to speak. I'm not expecting anyone to take care of me. I know I'm old, but I don't want to burden my daughter-in-law, so I mostly use the facilities every day. Oh, really? Responded my mother-in-law. I've already transferred my assets to the couple as gifts while I'm still alive. They can use that money for the facilities or whatever they want, so you won't have to lift a finger. Well, isn't that nice? My mother-in-law replied with irritation evident in her tone. Even when her son tried to placate her, it seemed to have little effect. This discussion ends here. It's time to go home, my mother-in-law stated firmly, bringing the conversation to an abrupt close. With that single statement from my mother-in-law, the meeting came to an end. Women have become stronger these days. Perhaps that's the way of the world now. The rest of us, born in the 60s, returned home with mixed feelings. A few days later, my husband and Brad were at work, my mother-in-law was at the adult home, and I was alone at home on my day off from my part-time job when the phone rang. Oh hey there, Auntie, Alice's voice surprised me when I picked up the phone. Auntie, can you not come to the wedding? Alice's request caught me off guard. What? I exclaimed in surprise at her unexpected request. You're not Brad's biological parent. Technically, you're his aunt. Since there's no blood relation, you're essentially a stranger. Strangers shouldn't come to weddings. But what about Brad? He wants us, his parents, to be at the ceremony, I pleaded. He doesn't matter. I'm planning the wedding my way. At the ceremony, I'll prepare a letter to his deceased parents that will surely move everyone, Alice insisted. That's not how it works. Brad's biological parents were important to him, but he considers us his real parents. That thought brought tears to her eyes before. I explained desperately. If you really want to attend, you'll have to be very generous with your gift. You received an inheritance from your mom, right? So, $10,000 is the bare minimum, if that's the case. I might let you sit in the far corner of the relative seats. How could you say such a thing? If you don't like it, fine. Don't come to the wedding. Oh, but you still have to give a gift. Wire transfer or registered mail is fine. Bye, Alice declared curtly before hanging up. The phone call felt like a whirlwind, leaving me unsettled. That night, Brad was working late due to overtime, and my husband was out for drinks. It was just my mother-in-law and me at home, contemplating the situation in silence. Looks like Alice doesn't like me, I remarked with concern. That's a problem, sighed my mother-in-law. Let's make her like us then, I suggested plainly. Simple and clear, if she dislikes us, we'll make ourselves likable, my mother-in-law agreed. And so, we stayed up late into the night, plotting various strategies. The sight of us grinning with satisfaction and saying, "Perfect, let's do this," left my husband dumbfounded when he returned home, but that's another story. The next day at lunch, when I called Alice and told her we had something for her, she came over promptly. Here to collect some cash, I joked as she arrived. Shaking my head at her assumption, I pulled out something. "What's this?" Alice asked, puzzled. "It's a cupcake I made," my mother-in-law chimed in with a smile. "I heard you don't have grandparents. Try some of this. It's a super traditional one." "I don't want it," Alice protested. "Don't be shy. Here you go," my mother-in-law insisted, pushing the treat towards her. Alice resisted, but my mother-in-law's assertiveness prevailed as she managed to get the cupcake into Alice's mouth. Well, that's gross. Why is this so salty? Alice exclaimed, quickly washing it down with the iced tea we had served. Salty? That's odd. It shouldn't be, I remarked, taking a bite myself and grimacing. We had entrusted everything to my mother-in-law, including the preparation and cleanup. But who could have predicted such a basic mistake? The cupcake plan had failed, but we remained undeterred. That's all right, let's move on to the next one, I said with determination. I have a gift for you. Wedding money? A gift card? Nope. Alice eyed the slightly larger paper bag I handed her, disappointment creasing her forehead as she inspected it. What's this? It's a dress. I hope you like it. It's gross. This isn't my taste at all. I would rather have money. Money? Alice bluntly stated her preference, making me reconsider giving it to her. I had carefully chosen the dress, thinking it would suit her well. Not having a daughter, I wasn't entirely familiar with current fashion trends for young women. Despite consulting with the store clerk, it seemed my efforts had fallen short. A real letdown. Another plan had failed, and instead of bringing us closer, it seemed to worsen things. That's enough. I don't want anything else. Just give me the cash, Alice demanded. A cash gift truly captures the spirit of celebration. Don't you want to celebrate your son? Of course. I do. Then I'll give it to my son. The wife should manage the husband's money. That's only natural. Just hurry up and hand it over, old woman. As Alice spoke, her true nature emerged, leaving me feeling saddened. Who are you calling an old woman? I'm still spry. Just by seeing spry, actually you're a granny, Alice continued brazenly. While I wondered how to respond, we were suddenly interrupted by a familiar voice saying, I'm home. Brad, wait, what happened at work? Alice panicked, clearly worried about being overheard. We went bankrupt, Brad replied listlessly. Bankrupt? The company's gone under. Alice's misunderstanding echoed through the room, followed by stunned silence. It wasn't just Alice who was surprised. My mother-in-law and I were both taken aback. Alice grabbed my son's shoulders and started shaking him. What does bankrupt mean? Jobless, penniless. What are we going to do about the wedding? I'm sorry, it'll have to wait, Brad replied, his voice devoid of energy. Releasing her grip from my son, Alice cried out, then how am I supposed to pay the damages? It wasn't just Alice's words that shocked us. My mother-in-law and I were stunned. My son being jobless was one thing, but I couldn't keep up with everything that was happening. Damages? Ah, never mind. Just give me the gift money quickly, Alice said, no longer caring if my son was present, holding out her hand to me. Alice, could you give us an explanation? My mother-in-law interjected. Shut up. Just give me the money, Alice snapped. It's you who needs to shut up, young lady. Explain yourself. My mother-in-law's tone suddenly turned harsh, catching Alice off guard. Under the watchful gaze of my mother-in-law and me, Alice began to speak in a weak voice. Apparently, Alice had been having an affair with her boss at her part-time job. Moreover, the man was married, and his wife found out, demanding damages. Alice had no money to pay, so she devised a plan to marry my son. She calculated that if they married, she would receive a hefty sum in gift money and planned to have my son pay for all the wedding costs while she kept the gift money for herself. My mother-in-law and I were speechless. We were angry that she had used my son, but we were also astounded by how she didn't think she had done anything wrong throughout the entire conversation. I've already settled things with my boss. Once I pay the damages, it'll be over. That's why I'm going through with the marriage. Give me the gift money. It's fortunate the truth came out before the wedding, but I didn't know what to say to her. As I pondered, I heard a low, muffled voice. Don't make decisions on your own. Looking up, I saw my son Brad glaring at Alice, his face filled with anger. Brad was usually so calm. He had never raised his voice at her before. Alice appeared startled. So what if it's over? You're not even trying to pay the damages yourself. You were planning to use our marriage for your own gain. You haven't shown any remorse. Do you really love me? Of course I love you. That's why I want to get married. Then pay the damages yourself. Show some sincerity. But, Alice tried to hold onto my son, but he coldly pushed her away. Either way, we can't get married until I find a new job. Can you wait until then? Alice was speechless. If she truly loved him, she would have been willing to wait and support him. But those words didn't come from her. That's enough, Brad finally said in frustration. I never even liked you to begin with. I thought you could bring in some money, but I don't need a jobless, penniless man." At last, Alice revealed her true feelings. Perhaps that was what she had been thinking all along. With those words, she shouted and stormed out of the house. I wondered if Brad was truly okay with this. I noticed him shaking. When I turned around, ready to comfort him, I noticed something unexpected. Laughter. My son burst out laughing suddenly. Had the shock broken him? It was a lie. Huh? A lie? The company's not bankrupt? Business is doing well. I just came back to pick up something I forgot. It turned out the bankruptcy was a ruse. My son had returned during his lunch break to retrieve something he'd left behind. Spotting us together and hearing our conversation, he grew suspicious of Alice's insistence on money and set a trap for her. I'd heard that a person's true nature shows when they face joblessness and financial trouble. I wanted to test it. The result was enlightening, to say the least. "Do you still love her?" I asked cautiously. My son looked a bit melancholy. I loved her enough to want to marry her, but sometimes love fades in an instant. Maybe I didn't love Alice as deeply as I thought. Perhaps calling off the engagement was for the best. I exchanged a knowing glance with my mother-in-law, and we both found ourselves laughing at the situation. As for what happened next, we later learned that the cafe where Alice worked part-time had closed down. Apparently, the manager, who was Alice's affair partner, had to sell the cafe due to a messy divorce and hefty alimony payments. This information came from another regular customer at the cafe. According to Brad, Alice had no means to pay the alimony herself and had to rely on her parents. They were furious with her and ultimately kicked her out of the house. She ended up living in a rundown apartment and took up a night job. Years later, when my two younger sons had started their careers, Brad was preparing for his marriage. His partner was a kind-hearted woman. "Thank you for raising Brad into a wonderful man. I'm not much, but I'm looking forward to getting to know you both better," she told us, even knowing the truth. Moved to tears by her gratitude, both my husband and I were deeply touched. Seeing us emotional, Brad smiled broadly. "Congratulations, Brad. I'm sure your parents in heaven are also happy," I said to him. "Yes, but I'm happiest when my parents here with me are happy," Brad replied softly. His words brought tears to my eyes once more. "Oh dear, here come the tears again. You're crying too much. You've aged and gotten so tearful," my husband teased. I turned to him and declared, "Well, no beer for you tonight then." "Mary, it's me," he said, his voice a ghost from the past. It had been a decade since my ex-husband and our son's wife vanished into thin air after eloping. I'd buried thoughts of them deep within, avoiding the pain they left behind. But now, unexpectedly, his voice pierced through the years. "I'm going to move into your parents' place. You're still there, aren't you?" His demand was as startling as it was unwelcome. "I'm sorry for the abruptness, but you need to vacate my home," he insisted, leaving no room for negotiation. His request caught me off guard. A decade had passed since we last exchanged words, and his sudden reappearance left me bewildered. What could he possibly want now, after all this time? And why was he asking to move into my parents' home with his unfaithful partner? "Still bunking with the folks, huh? Any new spouses since we last talked?" His inquiry dripped with a mix of curiosity and condescension. "Get out of there pronto." Anger surged within me for the first time in a decade, fueled by his audacity to mock me further. Little did he know, my living arrangements had changed drastically over the years. "Sorry, but if you're eyeing my parents' place, you're out of luck," I retorted. "Huh?" His confusion was palpable, a stark contrast to the rage boiling within me. I made it clear to him that after a decade, my determination had only grown stronger. Mary Kane, 60 years old, and still teaching part-time at a private school, I asserted. Despite being at retirement age, I persisted with my part-time work, albeit with a reduced salary. My admiration for my parents, both esteemed educators, stemmed from cherished memories of my childhood. Their influence fueled my ambition to follow in their footsteps. There was a time when I had a husband, Stephen, but that chapter ended in divorce a decade ago, and now, out of the blue, he resurfaced after all these years of estrangement. Stephen and I first crossed paths in college, back when I was just 21, juggling part-time teaching at a tutoring center with my studies in education. Stephen, a fresh face at the tutoring center, had recently stepped into the role of a part-time teacher. Despite his seniority in years, it fell upon me with my longer tenure to mentor him as directed by the center's director. As I guided him through the ropes, our camaraderie blossomed into a close friendship, which eventually bloomed into something more. 3 years of courtship later, we exchanged vows and welcomed our son Michael into the world. With graduation came a full-time teaching position for me, prompting my departure from the tutoring center. Our journey together as a family was just unfolding, filled with promises of a bright future. 25 years flew by, witnessing Michael find love in Sarah, whom he'd met during his studies at a design school in New York. We rejoiced in their union, hopeful for the happiness they would build together as a couple. Then, unexpectedly, Michael returned home, burdened with something he needed to share. "Mom, you're still married to Dad, right?" His question, though seemingly innocuous, stirred a mix of emotions within me as I welcomed him back, the worry beginning to settle in. I spotted Dad strolling through Brooklyn with Sarah, Michael disclosed. "Okay," I replied, my mind racing with disbelief. According to Michael, he caught sight of Sarah and Dad arm in arm last Friday night in Brooklyn's bustling hotel district. Suspicion gripped him, prompting him to tail them discreetly. His surveillance led him to witness them disappear into a hotel. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Despite being in-laws, Stephen and Sarah shared a bond akin to that of a father and daughter. The notion of them meeting privately, let alone in a hotel, seemed unfathomable. I clung to the hope that it was a misunderstanding or a nightmare, but Michael's evidence shattered that illusion. The image on Michael's phone screen depicted a crystal-clear snapshot of Dad and Sarah entering the hotel arm in arm, unmistakably captured on a Friday night. Dad's excuse of overtime at the office crumbled in the face of this damning proof. Additionally, I couldn't shake off the memory of Stephen's frequent late arrivals home over the past few months. His explanations vary from happy hour gatherings with colleagues to sudden business trips or urgent work demands on holidays. Initially, I accepted his excuses without much skepticism, but upon closer reflection, I realized these occurrences had become more frequent lately. There seemed to be a pattern emerging, one that made me increasingly uneasy. Could these excuses be a cover for spending more time with Sarah? Requesting Michael to forward the image, I assured him I would confront his father before bidding him good night. Anticipation gnawed at me as I awaited Stephen's return home that evening. When he finally arrived, the scent of alcohol clung to him, aggravating my nerves. Summoning my courage, I approached him directly. "Stephen, Michael mentioned something today. Did you meet Sarah last Friday?" Yeah," he stammered, his response lacking conviction. "We did cross paths briefly. We chatted a bit, I think." His sudden alertness and the shift in his gaze didn't escape my notice. Sensing my apprehension, he countered with a question of his own. "What exactly did he tell you?" "He mentioned spotting you and Sarah entering a hotel in Brooklyn," I disclosed, my voice tinged with concern. As I spoke, I held up the picture Michael had given me. Stephen's reaction was immediate. His eyes widened, and he seemed to choke on his words, his gaze darting around as if seeking an escape. Finally, with a heavy sigh, he seemed to resign himself to the truth. "I can't believe Michael caught us," he muttered, his tone a mixture of surprise and resignation. "I let myself get carried away. It's unforgivable." My heart sank as his admission sank in. "No way, Stephen," I whispered, struggling to comprehend the betrayal. Realizing there was no use in denying it any longer, Stephen began to spill everything. He confessed to starting a relationship with Sarah 6 months prior, swayed by her advances and feelings that now eclipsed those for me. My mind reeled at the revelation. Had their affair begun around the time Michael and Sarah celebrated their 3rd anniversary? Despite my trembling shock, Stephen pressed on with his confession. "I want to marry Sarah, Mary. I'm filing for divorce," he declared, his words like a dagger to my already shattered heart. I objected vehemently, my mind spinning with disbelief, but Stephen remained resolute. "I can't continue like this. It's over between us." The following day, Stephen failed to return home. His absence was accompanied by a notable absence of his belongings and a finalized divorce decree left on the table. Later, a distraught call from Michael revealed that Sarah had disappeared, taking the divorce papers with her. It seemed she had no intention of coming back. The shock of Stephen and Sarah's sudden elopement left me reeling. That marked the end of my marriage to Stephen a decade ago. After the divorce, we sold our shared home, and I found solace in a new residence closer to my workplace. Initially, the loneliness of my new surroundings weighed heavily on me. Yet, as I immersed myself in my work, I gradually discovered that time had mended my emotional wounds. Teaching proved to be a powerful balm for my emotional wounds, a fact I only realized with hindsight. The steadfast dedication to my fulfilling career played a pivotal role in my healing journey. Continuing to work part-time at the school even after retirement, I found purpose and joy in the daily interactions with both colleagues and students. With each passing day, the weight of Stephen and Sarah's betrayal diminished, replaced by the gratification of nurturing young minds. 10 years on, thoughts of Stephen faded into the background of my life. While my income saw a decline after transitioning to part-time teaching, it remained sufficient for me to stay engaged with the school and the students who held me in high regard. Their affection and admiration filled a void akin to that of a parent. Additionally, I found solace in Michael's resilience, witnessing him throw himself into his work with renewed vigor, having overcome the initial shock of his father's and wife's betrayal. Any semblance of peace I had managed to find shattered with the shrill ring of the phone. "Hello, Mary, it's Stephen." His voice pierced the silence, breaking a 10-year hiatus. I never anticipated hearing his voice again, and when I did, a surge of emotions overwhelmed me. "What's the purpose of this call? You didn't reach out to reminisce about the past, did you?" My words tumbled out with more force than I intended, fueled by years of pent-up resentment. After all, it was Stephen who had insisted on the divorce, leaving me to pick up the pieces. Stephen, ever composed and seemingly indifferent, countered, "Come on now, what's the point of this? Why did you even bother contacting me? You're the reason we're no longer together. I've moved on, Mary. You're not my husband anymore, and I have no interest in seeing you or hearing your voice. Let's cut to the chase, Mary. You're back at your parents', right?" His casual interruption grated on my already frayed nerves, prompting me to raise my voice once more, struggling to contain the surge of emotions stirred by his insensitive and light-hearted tone. Stephen pressed on, oblivious to my turmoil. "Sarah's expecting," he announced, the news hitting me like a freight train. "But raising the child is proving more financially challenging than we anticipated. Making ends meet has become increasingly difficult." According to his account, despite the significant age gap of 30 years, he and Sarah had shared a passionate bond. However, the dynamics shifted when Sarah fell pregnant last year, upending their lives. Both Stephen and Sarah had quit their jobs ahead of the due date, only to find themselves struggling to secure new employment. Forced to scrape by with part-time work, they faced mounting financial strain. With Sarah unable to work following the birth, their precarious financial situation loomed large. I reached out to Michael and my parents for help, but they all refused. Stephen chuckled over the phone, his words carrying the bitter edge. "Stubborn lot, aren't they?" His laughter echoed in my mind, conjuring images of Stephen's stern father, determined mother, and sullen younger brother, faces I hadn't seen since their wedding 13 years ago. His family, a portrait of strictness, resolve, and seriousness, had cut ties with me after the divorce. Yet, despite our estrangement, I never imagined Stephen as the type to tolerate infidelity or betrayal within his own family. "So, what? You expect me to stay in our old house?" I said yes, but first prioritize your relationship with your wife. Your eldest daughter and first grandchild should take precedence over a mere teacher. Leave now. His abusive tone ignited a fierce anger within me. Had my memories of Stephen over the past decade been too idealized? I hadn't anticipated this callousness from him. Then a realization dawned on me. In a subdued voice, I uttered, "I'm sorry, but if you're referring to my parents' house, it's no longer ours." "What do you mean?" Stephen's confusion mirrored my own until I clarified. "Both my parents passed away, Dad 3 years ago, Mom just last year. Their house became too much for me to manage alone, so I sold it. I don't have a house to offer you, Stephen." "Ha. I won't disclose my current address, and even if I did, you're not welcome here. Don't ever show up." Stephen's voice boomed with authority. "What about my inheritance? When your parents pass, should the family home and money come to me?" I frowned, angered by Stephen's cold calculations regarding my parents' demise. It was evident he had his eyes set on not only my funds but also my parents' estate. Despite his mention of familial ties, it was too late for any semblance of trust. I had already received my rightful share from my parents' estate, including their house. My parents had made it clear they wouldn't leave a single cent to a man who shamelessly eloped with their daughter-in-law a decade ago. On the day of our divorce, they were incensed upon learning of Stephen and Sarah's betrayal from Michael and me. Their fury was justified. They had treated Stephen like their own son, only to be repaid with the gravest betrayal. Before their passing, my parents took proactive steps to secure their estate, drafting a will to ensure everything, including our family home, would pass on to me in the event of Sarah's return. 7 years after my father's demise, my mother followed, leaving me the sole inheritor of our family's estate. While reluctant to part with the cherished memories embedded in our home, I honored my parents' wishes and decided to sell it. They hoped it would shelter someone more deserving than Stephen and Sarah. Stephen's reaction was explosive upon learning of this decision. "Don't play dumb. You can't. This is absurd. They wouldn't approve." The inheritance was legally passed down to me, I countered firmly, and their forgiveness isn't something I seek, especially not from Stephen and Sarah, who've done nothing but cause turmoil. Stephen, who had idled away his days, had no business meddling in my affairs. As I gazed at my disconnected phone, I realized Stephen's true colors: someone who would abandon others for his own gain, then lash out when denied. It was a revelation that my ex-husband, with whom I'd shared years of my life, could be so immature. As contempt simmered in my heart, another call came through, this time from Sarah. "You didn't bother to inform me about my own in-laws passing," she accused, her voice dripping with accusation. But her words failed to move me. If Sarah had truly been shocked by my parents' deaths, she would have expressed condolences or a desire to pay her respects. Instead, she immediately steered the conversation towards inheritance, legacy, and money, revealing her true priorities. Neither Sarah nor Stephen deserved a place before my parents' altar. With that thought in mind, I cut Sarah off before she could finish speaking. Later, I received a call from Michael. "Mom, did Dad and Sarah show up at your place?" he inquired. "No, they didn't, but they called, asking about the house and their inheritance," I replied. Michael's voice carried a hint of resignation. "I see. I thought they might reach out, especially after they visited me the other day." "Michael, are you okay? Did they cause any trouble?" I asked, concerned. "I'm fine, Mom, really. They just made a scene at my door. When I threatened to call the police, they took off. But I have an idea." Michael revealed his plan to me, prompting a decision to break the cycle of toxicity between Stephen and Sarah, not just for my own sake, but to safeguard my son as he embarked on a fresh chapter. A few days after putting this plan into action, I received a frantic call from Stephen. "Mary, did you have a hand in this? You're unusually quiet," he blurted out. "Don't play innocent. What's going on?" I demanded. "They're on their way to our place," Stephen disclosed. "They? Who?" I pressed for clarification. Stephen explained that 7 women were en route to their apartment, his unfaithful partners. It appeared he'd been carrying on affairs with 7 other women, in addition to Sarah. Unaware of Stephen's infidelities with 7 other women, Sarah found herself caught off guard by the sudden chaos. As the women erupted in anger, Stephen's frustration grew, directed now at Sarah. The revelation of multiple affairs left me dumbfounded. "I knew it was you. How did you uncover my secret?" Stephen demanded. "I wonder," I retorted, "considering I have nothing left after my ex-husband abandoned me for another woman 10 years ago." "What?" Stephen's shock was palpable. Turning the conversation around, Stephen unleashed a torrent of expletives over the phone, but his outburst failed to faze me in the slightest. As Sarah's distress escalated during our conversation, she hastily packed her belongings, unleashing a heated argument with Stephen, oblivious to my presence on the line. It was a chaotic scene unfolding before my ears, reminding me of the saying, "Things spiral out of control." With a heavy heart, I directed my final words to my ex-husband, but they may have fallen on deaf ears. "Farewell, Stephen. Never darken my doorstep or our son's life again." With that, I ended the call. Little did Stephen know, the tumult sparked by the women he had been unfaithful with was the very plan Michael had alluded to. After Stephen and Sarah's tumultuous visit to Michael's home, where they were swiftly turned away, he wasted no time in enlisting the services of a professional detective agency to delve deeper into their affairs. As it turned out, Stephen's infidelity with Sarah had escalated into affairs with 7 other women, 3 of whom were married. Michael promptly relayed this information to me, along with Stephen and Sarah's current address, the very apartment uncovered by the detective agency. With this knowledge in hand, Michael and I coordinated a plan. We informed all 7 women of Stephen and Sarah's whereabouts and directed them to confront the couple simultaneously. The resulting chaos at Stephen and Sarah's apartment grew so intense that law enforcement had to intervene, dispatching police to the scene. Sarah ended her relationship with Stephen, and he found himself facing lawsuits from 3 aggrieved husbands, each demanding alimony payments exceeding 3 figures. Losing Sarah, his home, and his financial stability, Stephen now lives as a homeless individual in a park, struggling to make ends meet. A colleague spotted him seeking assistance at a soup kitchen. Meanwhile, Sarah, facing her own financial burdens, was hit with alimony demands surpassing 3 figures. Forced to borrow money to cover her expenses, she turned to a black market lender, a decision that would soon prove ominous. Shortly after securing the loan, she was forcibly abducted by intimidating individuals in a car, and her whereabouts remain unknown. 10 years have passed, and I've finally reached a final resolution with Stephen. Once again, I've returned to the tranquility of my life. While I remain single, contentment fills me as I immerse myself in the vibrant atmosphere of school. That alone is sufficient for me. In time, Michael found love with a woman who has a child of her own. They are now dating with the intention of marriage. My heart swells with hope that Michael, too, will discover a newfound joy and purpose in life. As Mary, nearing her late 50s, reflects on her life, she finds herself at a turning point. With her 2 children, one on the brink of marriage and the other thriving in college, she senses her motherly duties waning. As a former nurse, she contemplates a return to caregiving, feeling the pull of her profession once more. However, life throws her a curveball when she receives distressing news. Her father-in-law, Bob, has suffered a stroke. Rushing to the hospital at her husband John's urgent call, Mary's thoughts swirl with concern. Bob, always a pillar of kindness and warmth, has been grappling with the loss of his wife, Alice, for the past 3 years. Despite Mary's efforts to uplift his spirits through family gatherings and outings, she's noticed a gradual decline in Bob's energy. Just as she begins to see glimmers of his old vitality returning, the news of his stroke hits her like a thunderbolt. Arriving at the hospital, she finds Bob's daughter and son-in-law engaged in conversation, a mix of emotions swirling within her. "Apologies for my tardiness. How's Bob holding up?" I gasped out, hurting to catch up with John's sister, Isabella. Her response was a sigh of irritation as she glanced my way. Clearly annoyed. "You're late. We're in a hurry. Can you handle this?" With that brisk dismissal, she hurried off, leaving me behind. Isabella's indifference towards Bob was palpable, a demeanor she carried even when Alice, Bob's late wife, was alive. Despite Bob and Alice's unwavering kindness, Isabella remained aloof, untouched by their warmth. Left alone in the waiting area, I paced nervously, my thoughts consumed by Bob's condition. Meanwhile, John rushed in, his concern evident in the beads of sweat on his forehead and his soaked dress shirt. "Mary, how's Dad?" he asked anxiously. I shook my head, indicating I had no updates yet. John's reaction was visceral. He dropped the bags he was carrying, his complexion draining of color. "No, that's not what I meant," I reassured him quickly. "He's still in surgery. We're waiting for news." Relief washed over John, evident in the way he retrieved his fallen bags and slumped into a nearby chair. "Should we brace ourselves?" I hurried over to John, who teetered on the edge of tears, and placed a comforting hand on his back. "It'll be all right," I murmured, feeling utterly helpless with no words substantial enough to offer solace. Hours ticked by before the surgery's conclusion, and we were ushered into a small room by the doctor for an update. "The surgery went well, but there may be lasting effects," the doctor explained gently, indicating that Bob would require ongoing care. While our hearts hoped for Bob's swift recovery, the reality of caregiving loomed, a responsibility that would involve Isabella and her husband. John and I decided to reach out to Isabella to discuss the next steps. After a conversation, we agreed to convene at Bob's home, a gathering necessitated by the circumstances while Bob remained hospitalized. "I won't be his caregiver," Isabella declared bluntly, sending shockwaves through John and me. "But what are we supposed to do then?" I countered, baffled by her indifference. Isabella, nonchalant, continued toying with her meticulously manicured nails, a stark contrast to the gravity of the conversation. Her husband, Tom, simply nodded along. "What about a nursing home?" I suggested, met with Isabella's vehement refusal. "I'm not wasting money on that. This is what happens whenever I get involved, she snapped, shooting me a venomous glare. It's like my opinion doesn't matter, so I keep quiet. If he can't go to a facility and neither of you will care for him, what's the plan? John pressed, frustration seeping into his voice. That's why you should handle it. I don't want some burden in my home, Isabella chuckled callously, pushing me to my breaking point. Enough. He's your father, for heaven's sake. I snapped, my patience wearing thin. I don't care. Why am I expected to bear the responsibility just because he's my father? He's John's father too. I've been saying you two should handle it. I don't have a response to that. We'd love to care for him at home, but our house isn't equipped for it, I explained, feeling the weight of reality pressing down. There are too many obstacles, stairs, uneven floors, to bring my father-in-law here. We need significant renovations and we simply can't afford it. Mary, you're trained in caregiving, aren't you? It shouldn't be a big deal, Isabella remarked smugly, her tone grating on my nerves. John shared my frustration, and we silently agreed to table the discussion for now, retreating from his parents' home. What's our next move, Mary? You mentioned considering a return to caregiving, John inquired, his concern evident. It's not just about the job. We have to make this place safe for Dad, and that's a financial challenge, I replied, trying to reassure him. You're right, John conceded, acknowledging the daunting road ahead. I estimate it could cost around $100,000. That's just a ballpark figure, but considering the modifications needed for the entire first floor to accommodate him, that's roughly what we're looking at. I mused aloud, grappling with the daunting financial reality. With our eldest still in college, we simply don't have that kind of money. We're still paying off the mortgage, and the thought of taking on another loan for renovations is overwhelming. It's a difficult decision, but should we consider a facility for him? The question is, would he even be able to get in? The waitlists are long, and the expenses significant, and I doubt Isabella and her family would offer any assistance. It feels like we're stuck with no viable solution. Deciding to at least listen to my father-in-law's perspective, I made my way alone to the hospital where he was admitted. Stepping into his room, I was greeted by a sight that lifted my spirits. My father-in-law, visibly improved, greeted me with a warm smile. Please don't apologize, my father-in-law would often murmur upon my visits. There's no trouble at all. And look, I've brought you one of your favorite books today. Why apologize? You're bringing me joy, I'd respond, trying to uplift his spirits. The doctor had informed us of his stroke, leaving him unable to move the right half of his body independently. To read, he'd prop the book on the table, using a weight to keep the pages steady. Ah, thank you, my father-in-law replied gratefully, accepting the book I'd brought. I gently placed the book by his pillow. Dad, I came today because I wanted to talk about what lies ahead, I began, meeting his warm smile with a heavy heart. Oh, I understand. I'll be fine, even in a nursing home. I've prepared for it, so please don't worry, he reassured me, though I sensed a flicker of loneliness in his eyes. Well, Dad, if you're open to it, why not come stay with us? I have experience in elderly care, and as a stay-at-home mom, I have the time. John will be there too. Let's live together, I blurted out, sensing his solitude. His surprise was evident, perhaps realizing deep down that returning to his own home, where Isabella and her husband resided, might not be feasible. I couldn't shake the feeling that they'd view him as a burden, ultimately leading to a nursing home. The thought weighed heavily on me, overshadowing my initial intention to listen to my father-in-law's wishes. There was a twinge of guilt toward my husband John, but I knew he'd understand. Now, we needed to arrange for his care upon discharge. Money was a concern, so I decided to seek Isabella's input. With these thoughts swirling in my mind, I made my way home. When John returned from work, I recounted the events at the hospital. He appeared troubled but nodded, almost as if he had anticipated this turn of events. Without delay, John dialed Isabella's number. We're reaching out for assistance because we'll be the ones caring for Dad, John explained, his voice tinged with frustration as their conversation escalated. With a resigned sigh, he ended the call and briefed me on their exchange. Isabella refused to contribute any funds. It seems there's little we can do about it, he disclosed, his concern evident as he contemplated the financial implications for his father-in-law. From then on, our home buzzed with activity. We deliberated over renovations, essential care supplies, and received guidance on home care options. When I informed my father-in-law that he'd be moving in with us upon discharge, his expression was a mix of gratitude and regret. "Mary, could you fetch the checkbook from over there?" he requested, gesturing toward a cloth bag on the shelf. Curious as to why he'd need it, I obliged, retrieving the checkbook during one of our visits. Observing my father-in-law, I watched as he opened the bank book and presented it to me. "I have some savings here. Could you and John make use of it?" The figure written in the checkbook was staggering, surpassing any amount I'd ever seen. Stunned, I must have appeared frozen, prompting my father-in-law to chuckle. "You and John will be looking after me now, won't you? I heard about the new car, the renovations to make the house accessible. Would $10 million cover it? $10 million. The zeros overwhelmed me, leaving me speechless. I couldn't fathom why my father-in-law had amassed such a fortune, but it seemed that after my mother-in-law's passing, he had turned to investments he had been studying, and they had proven lucrative. His savings had grown exponentially, fueled by his restrained spending habits. Yet even if he intended to renovate the house or purchase a car, the sum seemed excessive. Reluctantly, I returned the bank book, shaking my head. "I can't accept this much. Please keep it for yourself." He pushed the book back toward me, insisting, "I can't possibly use all of this. I'd rather return it to you and your family, who are willing to care for me." Once again faced with the returned bank book, I stood my ground. "I really can't accept such a large sum," I insisted firmly. After a brief pause, my father-in-law proposed, "How about $1 million?" Realizing the impasse, I managed to negotiate a compromise, settling on a reduced amount of $100,000. Though he seemed reluctant, he agreed, and for the time being, that seemed satisfactory. As we were in the midst of this exchange, Isabella suddenly appeared, catching us off guard. Quickly, I stashed the bank book back in its place. Seeing my hurried actions, Isabella's brow furrowed in concern. "What's going on?" she inquired, her voice tinged with worry. I breathed a sigh of relief, grateful she hadn't overheard our previous conversation. Isabella had come to deliver some clothes for our father. After a brief exchange, we left the hospital room together. However, on our way home, Isabella suggested stopping by a coffee shop for a discussion. Given her history of bringing up unpleasant topics, I braced myself for what was to come. Reluctantly, I acquiesced, unaware of the twist awaiting us. "I'll take care of Dad," Isabella declared out of the blue, stunning me. Her sudden proposition caught me off guard, especially since we were already knee-deep in preparations to accommodate my father-in-law, including ongoing renovations to our home. I couldn't fathom why she would make such a proposal at this stage. "So you won't need to visit the hospital anymore," she added. "Visiting isn't solely the responsibility of the caregiver. There's no rule dictating that only the caretaker should visit." Why would she say that? I pondered, feeling perplexed by Isabella's unexpected offer. Despite my reservations, I suggested we postpone discussing it further and made my exit from the cafe. Back at home, I shared the encounter with John, who mulled over it before a realization dawned on him. "She must have caught wind of the savings," he concluded. "It seems that's the case," he added. "Otherwise, she wouldn't have volunteered for the caretaking role, especially given her previous reluctance." I harbored a vague suspicion that Isabella had somehow discovered the extent of my father-in-law's savings and was angling to secure a share of it for herself. Perhaps she would concoct a reason to start dipping into the funds. "But what do we do about it?" I queried, feeling a sense of unease. "I got an idea. Let's give her a chance," John suggested with a mischievous grin, hinting at a plan brewing in his mind. Uneasy about his scheme, I opted to stay silent and play along with Isabella's request for the time being. I assured my father-in-law that financial concerns were no longer an issue and that Isabella would be providing care. His response was vague, his expression neither confirming nor denying his comprehension. With that, the conversation concluded. Following his discharge from the hospital, my father-in-law returned to the family home in Nebraska, where Isabella resided. During a visit to the house, I couldn't discern any signs of renovation or adequate caregiving supplies. I questioned whether genuine caregiving could take place under such circumstances. However, it was Isabella's decision, and I felt it wasn't my place to intervene, so I remained silent. 2 months later, I received a frantic call from Isabella. "Mary, I can't do this anymore. Please come over right now," she pleaded urgently. Concerned, I wasted no time and rushed to the house in Nebraska. Upon my arrival, I was greeted by a disarrayed house and a foul odor lingering in the air. Puzzled by the scene before me, Isabella emerged, looking more worn out than ever. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her movements were unsteady. "Are you all right?" I asked, rushing to her side, alarmed by her condition. Isabella grasped my hand tightly and muttered, "Get rid of that." Confused at first, I managed to calm her down and coax an explanation out of her. It appeared that she had underestimated the demands of caregiving. From assisting with mobility and meals to managing incontinence, including dealing with diapers, the responsibilities had overwhelmed her. She felt incapable of managing anything, not even attending to her own needs. I reassured her that I couldn't make any immediate decisions but promised to reach out as soon as possible. With a heavy heart, I carried this burden home with me. "It's been 2 months already." "Impressive," John remarked, glancing at the calendar. It seemed he had anticipated this turn of events. He suggested we pick up my father-in-law on his next day off, and I readily agreed. A few days later, as we arrived at the family home in Nebraska, my father-in-law was already packed and prepared to depart. Relief washed over me knowing we could finally bring him home. Just because I endured for 2 months and used to live here doesn't mean I don't deserve compensation. "I think $5 million sounds fair," Isabella declared suddenly as we were assisting my father-in-law into the car. I froze in disbelief. John, too, was taken aback, turning to face Isabella with a mixture of surprise and dismay. But she remained unfazed, sporting a smug expression. "Isabella, what on earth are you talking about? This isn't the time or place to discuss money, especially not in front of Dad. Remember, he raised us," John reasoned, attempting to appeal to her sense of decency, but his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. "I'm his daughter. It's only fair that I get compensated," Isabella retorted defiantly, her audacity catching me off guard. How could she be so brazen? Appalled by Isabella's attitude, I couldn't hold back. "Isabella, discussing money in this manner is completely inappropriate. Besides, you've already received funds," I interjected, my father-in-law echoing my sentiment with a disbelieving expression. "That's all gone now. Just $5 million. What's the harm in that? If you're just going to squander it away, you might as well put it to good use, sis." Isabella's callous words towards her own father left me speechless. Even my typically composed husband John was visibly enraged, his face flushing red with anger as he glared at his sister. "John, it's all right. She's stating the truth." Bob, my father-in-law, attempted to calm his incensed son. Then, turning to Isabella with a stern demeanor, he delivered his verdict. "Isabella, you are no longer welcome in this house. Leave immediately." His tone was cold and final. Stunned by his words, Isabella stood frozen in shock. What? What are you saying?" "I'm your daughter, Dad," Isabella exclaimed in disbelief. "I have only one child, my son, and this woman beside me, Mary, is my daughter-in-law. I no longer recognize you. Leave with your foolish husband." Bob, my father-in-law, responded with a sternness that startled me. I had only known him to be gentle and soft-spoken, but now his eyes were steely, commanding no opposition. Even Isabella seemed subdued by his authority. "Shall we depart then? We're relying on you moving forward," Bob continued, his demeanor shifting back to its usual warmth as he addressed me. With no other recourse, John and I complied with his directive. As we drove away, leaving Isabella behind in stunned silence, it felt surreal. Later, we learned that Bob had arranged with his lawyer to draft a last will and testament, ensuring that the inheritance would solely benefit John and guaranteeing that Isabella would not receive any portion of it. With Isabella gone, the house stood vacant and John and I expressed our desire to reside there. Bob gladly agreed. Isabella and her husband relocated to an apartment, but it became evident they had been tapping into Bob's finances even when he was in good health. Their extravagant spending habits landed them in debt, and now they struggle to settle it. Each day, I can't shake the feeling that this downfall was bound to happen for someone like Isabella, who lacks respect and gratitude towards her parent, regardless of biological ties. While tending to Bob's needs presents its challenges, my background in caregiving allows me to handle it without feeling burdened, and our relationship remains strong.